Hi Tal, hi everybody. My name is Diana. I've got here Tal Laor. Tal, just before we begin our interview, could you please introduce yourself in a few words, who you are, where do you live, what you're doing? And afterwards, we'll go on with the green passport and all the things that you want to talk about regarding the situation in Israel.
Right. Thank you, Diana. I was born, raised, and been living all my life in Israel. I served in the military in Israel. I retired as a captain from the Israeli military.
Wow.
I studied in university here in Israel, actually 2 universities. I got a master's degree in psychology. I then, most of my career was done in business. I started doing business in Israel in the 90s, and then during the last 20 years, I've been doing business overseas, mainly in Europe. The field that my expertise is in data analysis, mainly. I dealt with analytical software, statistical software, and I basically retired about this year, a couple of years ago.
Okay.
Right.
So it seems like you are very connected to the Israeli culture and tradition and everything. You're talking about, I was born in Israel, I studied this in Israel, I did my military service in Israel. You feel a lot of connection. But we all know that in the last year, something really very strange is happening here in Israel. Like people are feeling disconnected to the standards, to the values. We have been like grown up on these values. Could you please tell us, people from one side like see like, wow, Israel is something very extraordinary happening in Israel. People have got back to life. Everything is really pink, as happy. And on the other side, we're hearing all kinds of stories about pressure and about all kinds of stuff that's happening here in Israel, and people are feeling really psychological pressure, internal pressure, and all kinds of things which many people abroad, outside of Israel, don't really understand. So we'd like to hear from you. What you feel? Mostly when you have the psychological, you come from psychology, you understand more than many other people can understand. So please tell us, how do you see the situation here? What's really happening here in Israel?
Okay, let me say this. If anyone asked me a year ago, even half a year ago, if I would imagine that we will be in the point where we are now, at this point in time, I would say that they lost their mind. What we're going through as of now was not only totally unexpected, but basically incomprehensible. You did not, or most people I know, including myself, never thought that we will reach this point in terms of the threat over civil rights in Israel. This alleged pandemic was used by the government of Israel to a very large extent in order to limit human rights in Israel. And this has been going on for a year now, and it's ever increasing. What we've been going through the last 3 months, for example, since the vaccine was first introduced, is even far worse than what we've gone through during the first half year or 9 months.
Yeah.
So we're actually fighting for our rights, or many of us. Mm-hmm. Some of the rights that were taken actually are applicable to most citizens in Israel, whereas others are only applicable to those who chose not to get the vaccine. And that's another layer that's been added quite recently on top of the other hardships that most of us suffer. I'm really concerned. I think that we are running 140 kilometers per hour downhill. And if it's not stopped now, only God will help us. I don't know if it can ever be stopped to a sufficient extent.
Yes.
So it's a battle. We're going through a battle now.
I can understand. I feel the very same. It's the same exactly.
Mm.
But you have been talking about limiting our citizen rights and feeling like many people just don't understand what you mean by this limiting, by this word limiting. Can you give us some examples? What you mean by that? How do you feel? What gives us this kind of feelings that you've been limited from doing some things that you have been used to do, and now you just don't have the right to do it? And there are other people that get all of the rights and go on like everything has come back to normal. And many other people like you and like me feel like we haven't gone back to normal. The situation is getting worse and worse every day, and we really don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. What more rights are going to be taken from us tomorrow and next week and maybe in just 1 month? So let's go
Mhm.
deeper into it and give the world, just let them see what you mean by these limits.
Okay, with your permission, I will briefly describe the phases that we went through since a year ago, say last March, until now. Because, as I said, it's ever increasing. I think this is kind of a plan that is now implemented, that started somewhere and is rapidly going somewhere else. So it started by non-disclosure of a lot of the parameters that are relevant to the so-called pandemic. As people here in Israel know, the discussions of the what they call the Corona cabinet, which is a part of the Israeli government, that had to do with decisions, very significant decisions that were taken regarding this situation. These discussions are concealed for 30 years. This is unheard of. It's unprecedented, and I don't think that there's anywhere else in the world that this measure has been taken. Yeah. So you don't really know what are the motivations, what are the reasons for these decisions, what led to them, and to what extent actually are they anchored in reality. Now I'm jumping to the vaccine phase, which is quite recent. And just as another example, the agreement between the Israeli government and Pfizer had to be fought for in terms of disclosing it. And once it was disclosed, about a third of it is blackened. Yeah. So it was not fully disclosed, and the most significant parts, allegedly, are not known as yet, including, by the way, the date on which it was signed. Why hiding the date? Yes. Probably because it was signed prior to the FDA giving their authorization. That's probably why. But there's a series of indications that we really don't know. The government actually makes a special effort in order to leave us in the dark. Yeah. So that's one thing. The other thing is, once you don't know enough, whatever interested parties can actually practice deception. They give you their side of the story because you don't know any better. And their side of the story actually serves very well, serves their interests, exactly. They tell you that it's a horrible, unprecedented medical risk to each and every citizen of this country. Children, elderly people, pregnant women, everyone alike. And therefore, once they are able to present their perception of the situation, then they can, on top of that, build certain requirements or demands from citizens in terms of surrendering some of their civil rights. Yeah. Because obviously, if there's something so crucial, so critical, in order to properly fight it, you have to give up something. Yes. And then that third stage is about intimidation. They create a situation where people are really frightened. They are scared for their lives. Literally, they're scared for their lives.
They're scared of every person.
For no good reason. I'm sorry?
Yes. They're scared of every person they see. When they see me walking
Yeah,
without a mask, I feel like, oh my God, I'm some kind of terrorist. They're walking in the street. They put the mask here. I can hardly see their eyes. So far, they're so frightened. It's
yeah,
really very sad.
yeah. That's a good example. Yeah, the mask thing has been practiced again in a far more extreme way than in most other places in the world,
Yes.
where right from day one and for a year now, we have to wear masks outside in open areas, even when there are no one around us. And it's been enforced in sometimes in a violent manner. There are these movies that are shared by social media where policemen actually jump all over a poor person actually sitting alone in the park just because he was not wearing a mask.
Yeah.
So that's part of it. The other thing is that people are now afraid of each other, as you rightfully said. That's another idea that was planted in people's heads, that potentially everyone is a time bomb. And if you don't protect yourself from your neighbor, then this time bomb is about to blow in your face.
Yes.
And that's obviously a horrible way to manage the interpersonal relationship at the time of a pandemic.
Yeah.
Based on these, on that sequence of things that led to each other, the ultimate goal was, and is still with us, is to create an emergency situation, legally speaking. The government has passed these regulations, again, unprecedented, no parallel in the rest of the world. Extreme deprivation of ordinary citizens from their basic natural rights
Yeah.
in some cases. The freedom of movement, for example, with all these lockdowns that, again, Israel is probably number one in the world, or among the first in terms of the number of days that the population was under complete lockdowns. Um, a lockdown is basically a confiscation of your freedom. Um, Another thing is the freedom to support yourself by way of work, to write, and to earn a living. A
Yes.
lot of people, about 1 million people, actually lost their source of living.